Welcome back to our study of A Course in Miracles. I'm Danny Spendlove, and today we are in Chapter 3, Section 4, titled Error and the Ego. Paragraph 1. The abilities you now possess are only shadows of your real strength. All of your present functions are divided and open to question and doubt. This is because you are not certain how you will use them and are therefore incapable of knowledge. And this reminded me of back in chapter 1, section 6, paragraph 2, where the whole section 6, is called the illusion of needs. And so in paragraph 2, it says unified needs lead to unified action, because this produces a lack of conflict. So in this section, it was talking about how we divide ourselves into levels. And so when we think we have different levels, then we're trying to meet those needs on those different levels, and they are conflicting. The levels conflict with each other. What we think we need for one level conflicts with what we need on another level. So unified needs lead to unified action, because this produces a lack of conflict. So if we can unify the levels and get rid of all the levels and unify ourselves into one thing, then we have unified action because there's a unified goal. There's only one need, so all of our action goes to meet that. So that's what this one made me think of when it said that the abilities we now possess are only shadows of your real strength. All of your present functions are divided and open to question and doubt. This is because you are not certain how you will use them, because we're separated into levels, and like where are we going to use our powers? Our powers are being divided towards different goals for our different levels. And since we are not certain, we are therefore incapable of knowledge. You are also incapable of knowledge because you can still perceive lovelessly. Perception did not exist until the separation introduced degrees, aspects, and intervals. Spirit has no levels, and all conflict arises from the concept of levels. Only the levels of the Trinity are capable of unity. The levels created by the separation cannot but conflict. This is because they are meaningless to each other. So if you remember, it talked about the Trinity in the previous section. Just kidding. 2 sections ago, chapter 3, section 2. The Son of God is part of the Holy Trinity, but the Trinity itself is one. There is no confusion within its levels because they are of one mind and one will. Paragraph 2. Consciousness, the level of perception, was the first split introduced into the mind after the separation, making the mind a perceiver rather than a creator. So you know how we talk about you have your conscious mind and your subconscious mind, and if you've read Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess by Dr. Caroline Leaf, there's also the non-conscious mind. So our mind is kind of split into different levels. And this is saying that that consciousness, the level of perception, was the first split introduced into the mind after the separation, making the mind a perceiver rather than a creator. So with our conscious mind, we're mostly just perceiving. When you're, like awake and conscious by this world's terms, then where our mind is only perceiving and interpreting information. It's not creating. There are other levels of our mind where we are or can create or miscreate, as we often do. Consciousness is correctly identified as the domain of the ego. The ego is a wrong-minded attempt to perceive yourself as you wish to be rather than as you are. Yet you can know yourself only as you are, because that is all you can be sure of. Everything else is open to question. So, interesting. Here's where the Course officially introduces the ego, and it's actually going to talk way more about the ego in chapter 4. So the ego is a wrong-minded attempt to perceive yourself as you wish to be rather than as you are. Yet you can know yourself only as you are because that is all you can be sure of. And remember, knowledge, if we're talking about knowing, you can only know truth. You can only know what you are certain of, and you can only be certain of what you actually are. So it's kind of circular, but anyway, I think you get it. Paragraph 3. The ego is the questioning aspect of the post-separation self, which was made rather than created. So the ego wasn't created, it's not eternal. It's something that as soon as we stop believing in it, it's going to cease to exist. But for right now, in this post-separation state that we've made for ourselves, the ego is the questioning aspect of ourselves. It is capable of asking questions, but not of perceiving meaningful answers, because these would involve knowledge and cannot be perceived. So meaningful answers would be like correct perception, which is the foundation for knowledge, and ego cannot come anywhere, can't even come close to knowledge. So your ego cannot perceive meaningful answers like miracles, because remember, miracles are the right answer to the question. The mind is therefore confused because only one-mindedness can be without confusion. A separated or divided mind must be confused. It is necessarily uncertain about what it is. It has to be in conflict because it is out of accord with itself. So again, it's been divided, separated into levels. And so now it's in conflict because those levels are trying to compete with each other. This makes its aspects strangers to each other. And this is the essence of the fear-prone condition, in which attack is always possible. So this is where fear gets introduced into your mind, because it's separated and its aspects are at war or in conflict with each other. You have every reason to feel afraid as you perceive yourself. This is why you cannot escape from fear until you realize that you did not and could not create yourself. Because in this state that we perceive ourselves, in like split into all these levels, all these conflicting aspects of ourselves, like, we are right to fear this. This is a scary picture we have painted of ourselves. And the only way to escape from fear is to realize that you did not and could not create yourself. So all of this is not real. You can never make your misperceptions true, and your creation is beyond your own error. So when you start to realize, oh, these are misperceptions and miscreations, and I can't create myself, therefore these things I believe about myself aren't true. That's the only way you can begin to escape from fear. That is why you must eventually choose to heal the separation. It is inevitable. At some point, you will begin to realize that the things you believe about yourself are not true. And then you will eventually choose to heal the separation. Paragraph 4. Right-mindedness is not to be confused with the knowing mind, because it is applicable only to right perception. So right-mindedness is also perception, it's not knowledge. You can be right-minded or wrong-minded, and even this is subject to degrees, clearly demonstrating that knowledge is not involved. So knowledge is one of those all or nothing situations. Like, you can have light or you can have darkness, but you can have a little bit of both. You can have everything or you can have nothing, but you can't have a little bit of both. So knowledge is another one of those things where you can have all of it or you have none of it. There is no degrees of knowledge. There's degrees of perception, which is why we can have right perception, and that's the basis of knowledge. But once you know everything. There is no like, oh, I have a piece of knowledge. It's all connected. So once you have knowledge, you have all knowledge. So you can be right-minded or wrong-minded, and even this is subject to degrees. So you can have some right-mindedness and some wrong-mindedness. And This clearly demonstrates that knowledge is not involved. Because there would be no degrees if it was knowledge. You would just know. End of story. The term right-mindedness is properly used as the correction for wrong-mindedness and applies to the state of mind that induces accurate perception. It is miracle-minded because it heals misperception, and this is indeed a miracle in view of how you perceive yourself. I love that. With how awful you see yourself, it is truly a miracle that can be healed. Paragraph 5. Perception always involves some misuse of mind because it brings the mind into areas of uncertainty. So the true use of your mind is for knowledge. So anytime you are perceiving, you're bringing the mind into areas of uncertainty, and that is a misuse of your mind. The mind is very active. Yeah, don't I know it? The mind is very active. When it chooses to be separated, it chooses to perceive. Until then, it wills only to know. Your mind only wants to know. But once it made the choice to be separated, then it made the choice to perceive and to not have knowledge anymore. Afterwards, so after it chose to be separated, it can only choose ambiguously, and the only way out of ambiguity is clear perception. The mind returns to its proper function only when it wills to know. This places it in the service of spirit, where perception is changed. The mind chooses to divide itself when it chooses to make its own levels. But it could not entirely separate itself from spirit, because it is from spirit that it derives its whole power to make or create. Even in miscreation, the mind is affirming its source with a capital S, or it would merely cease to be. I want to go over that one more time. So it can't divide itself completely from spirit, the mind, because it is from spirit that it derives its whole power to make or create. That spirit, which is in the inner altar, the mind can separate, divide itself from it, but it can't completely separate from spirit, because spirit is where all of its power comes from to create, which is also the power to make. So even in miscreation, the mind is affirming its source, or it would merely cease to be. If you were not a true creation of God and perfect and whole, which your spirit is, you would have no power to make or create. So even your miscreations are saying that you are a child of God and have the power of God in you. How amazing is that? I just love that even when we are messing up, we are affirming that we are children of God and have the power of God in us. Like, that's just sounds like something a perfect God would do, right? Like, even when you're rebellious and like trying to, I think of like a teenager, you're like trying to prove your independence, you're actually showing that you are connected to the thing you're trying to be independent from. Okay. This is impossible because the mind belongs to spirit, which God created and which is therefore eternal. So God created spirit, your spirit's eternal, and the mind is connected to spirit. So you can't just cease to exist. You are eternal. Paragraph 6. The ability to perceive made the body possible. This is an interesting paragraph. I hope you listen and follow along with this. The ability to perceive made the body possible because you must perceive something and with something. So again, knowledge, you don't need to see it. You don't need to hear it. You don't need to feel it. Knowledge, you just know. There's no need for a body. But when you chose to separate yourself and to drop into this lower level of perception rather than knowledge, then the body became useful, because to perceive, you need to perceive with something. So with your eyes, with your ears, with your senses. So it's only the ability to perceive that made the body possible. That is why perception involves an exchange or translation. which knowledge does not need. So you have to translate what you're seeing, what you're hearing, the things you're experiencing. Knowledge doesn't need that kind of translation. The interpretive function of perception, a distorted form of creation, then permits you to interpret the body as yourself in an attempt to escape from the conflict you have induced. Let me go over that one more time because this is important. So, perception then permits you to interpret the body as yourself in an attempt to escape from the conflict you have induced. So, instead of perceiving yourself as spirit, you are now perceiving yourself as a body. You think that the body is you, the structure is you instead of the altar, the inner altar. And this is in an attempt to escape from the conflict you have induced. So again, in the previous paragraph, it was talking about how the mind chose to divide itself, which creates all sorts of conflict. And so then, in an attempt to escape from that conflict, we chose to see ourselves, identify as a body rather than as a spirit. Spirit, which knows, so your spirit will always know. Spirit cannot be reduced to perception. But spirit, which knows, could not be reconciled with this loss of power. I just want to say that again. Spirit, which knows, could not be reconciled with this loss of power. I don't know why that's like making me emotional all of a sudden. I don't know. I guess just because so many of us think that we're so powerless and worthless. And so our spirit, which has only knowledge, is only capable of knowledge, could not be reconciled with this loss of power because it is incapable of darkness. Wow. Sorry, guys. Hold on, I can't see. Gotta get these tears out of my eyes. Your spirit is incapable of darkness and can't be reconciled with this loss of power. We're so willing to give up our power, but our spirit cannot be reconciled to that. This makes spirit almost inaccessible to the mind and entirely inaccessible to the body. Therefore, spirit is perceived as a threat because light abolishes darkness merely by showing you it is not there. So it is mentioned in previous sections, it talks about how we are trying to defend ourselves against right-mindedness, against spiritual sight. And it's kind of like, why would we do that? Why would we be trying to defend ourselves against that? And this explains it. It's because spirit, which is only light and incapable of darkness, cannot be reconciled to this body, which accepts this loss of power and darkness and perceiving itself as lacking. The spirit cannot reconcile itself to that. And it said earlier in this paragraph that our body is only made possible because we reduced ourselves to the level of only perception, of not having knowledge. So as soon as we are fully aware of our spirit, fully aware of that light and that power, our bodies will no longer be necessary. And if we identify as a body, that actually makes us scared of the spirit, scared of our spirits. Our power is frightening to us because once we fully embrace that power and light, we'll have knowledge and there will be no more need for a body. So your ego is terrified of that and will do anything it can to protect itself, defend itself against that kind of perception, which leads to knowledge. Isn't that fascinating? Therefore, Spirit is perceived as a threat because light abolishes darkness merely by showing you it is not there. Truth will always overcome error in this way. This cannot be an active process of correction because, as I've already emphasized, knowledge does not do anything. So knowledge is not actively trying to bring itself to you and correct in that way. Knowledge just knows, it doesn't do. So it's not an active process, it's not taking action. It can be perceived as an attacker, but it cannot attack. Knowledge cannot attack, but it can be perceived as an attacker. What you perceive as its attack is your own vague recognition that knowledge can always be remembered, never having been destroyed. So there's a part of you that knows that all you have to do is remember it. You just have to remember the knowledge that you already have. Spirit can never be divided from the knowledge. So your spirit knows. And once you embrace spirit, you will also embrace the knowledge. And so the ego perceives knowledge as attacking it, but only because once we fully remember knowledge, it will eradicate the ego. Is this fascinating? I think this is fascinating. Okay, paragraph 7. God and his creations remain in surety, and therefore know that no miscreation exists. Truth cannot deal with errors that you want. You have to be willing to release them. I was a man who remembered spirit and its knowledge. As a man, I did not attempt to counteract error with knowledge, but to correct error from the bottom up. So Christ didn't just bring knowledge directly to us in his purity. We weren't ready for that. We would have felt like it was attack, right? So he corrected from the bottom up, meaning began with our misperceptions and tried to correct the misperceptions as a way to prepare us to receive knowledge. I demonstrated both the powerlessness of the body and the power of the mind. And if you recall in chapter 3, section 1, in paragraph 1, it says, the crucifixion did not establish the atonement. The resurrection did. So if you remember talking about that, the resurrection established the atonement. And that's what I thought of when I read that line. Christ says, I demonstrated both the powerlessness of the body and the power of the mind. So, and again, sorry, this one also came to me. If you recall, it talks about, oh man, I can't remember what section, but it talks about how we can heal the sick and raise the dead because we created sickness and death ourselves. So our minds create sickness and death. And Christ demonstrated both the powerlessness of the body and the power of the mind. So by allowing himself to die and then rising the third day, he basically proved to us that our minds are powerful enough to raise the dead. We can undo these misperceptions and miscreations that we have made that make us think that we are somehow powerless. Our spirit cannot be reconciled with this loss of power. And so we really do have the power to raise the dead and heal the sick. And Christ demonstrated that through the resurrection. Anyway, that was just a thought that I had. By uniting my will with that of my Creator, I naturally remembered spirit and its real purpose. I cannot unite your will with God's for you, but I can erase all misperceptions from your mind if you will bring it under my guidance. Only your misperceptions stand in your way. Without them, your choice is certain. Sane perception induces sane choosing. I cannot choose for you, but I can help you make your own right choice. Quote, many are called, but few are chosen, close quote, should be, quote, all are called, but few choose to listen, close quote. I'm going to say that again without all the quotes and close quoting. Many are called, but few are chosen. Should be, all are called, but few choose to listen. Therefore, they do not choose right. The, quote, chosen ones, close quote, are merely those who choose right sooner. Because remember, we are all going to choose right. There's no question about that. So the chosen ones are just those who choose right sooner. Right minds can do this now, and they will find rest unto their souls. God knows you only in peace, and this is your reality. And that is the end of this section. So please comment with any insights or questions that you have, and I look forward to seeing you next time.